What's the hardest family conversation you've never had?
At that dinner table, my mother leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on me with that familiar mixture of disappointment and judgment that I had grown used to my entire life, and in front of everyone she said, clear as a church bell on Sunday morning, "She's the one who matters." My sister beamed, her shoulders straightening like she had just been knighted, while I sat there with my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, the laughter from the others ringing in my ears as though it was aimed at me, not with me. I didn't respond, not even with a forced smile, because if I had opened my mouth in that moment, I think I would have said something I couldn't take back, and I knew that's what my mom wanted, a reaction, something to prove her right about me being the problem. The food on my plate tasted like cardboard, each bite sticking in my throat as my sister recited her little successes from the past week. From the promotion her boss had praised her for to the new car she had bought with the money Dad had so proudly contributed toward. Every nod from around the table felt like another reminder of my place, which was somewhere below, in the shadows, holding the pieces of a family that didn't seem to notice I was the one cleaning up their messes. When my aunt leaned over to say, "You must be so proud, Linda," and my mom answered with a satisfied smile, "Of course, she's the one who matters," I felt my chest tighten in a way that wasn't new but had never been this sharp before. I kept my lips pressed together, because I had learned long ago that in this family, silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. Words could be twisted, reshaped, retold by morning in ways that made you sound like the villain, and I wasn't about to hand them the ammunition on a silver platter. So I nodded when people asked small talk questions, kept my eyes down when the spotlight moved across the table, and focused on pushing peas around my plate. Anything to keep my hands busy while my mother performed her ritual of worshiping my sister and quietly dismantling me at the same time. When the plates were finally scraped clean, I slipped into autopilot, gathering dishes, stacking silverware, carrying them into the kitchen where the hum of the dishwasher was at least less judgmental than the noise in the dining room. I could hear the muffled laughter behind me, the sound of glasses clinking as dessert was served without anyone even asking if I wanted a slice, as if I were staff rather than family. I stayed quiet, washing, drying, arranging everything in neat rows, a routine that gave me control when I had none at that table. By the time I finished, most of the house had drifted into small groups, everyone buzzing around my sister as though she were the only flame worth circling. I left without a goodbye, slipping my coat on by the door, hoping no one would even notice, and walked out into the night air that bit at my cheeks, but at least didn't cut as deep as the words I had swallowed. The silence of the street was a relief, a space where I didn't need to perform, didn't need to hold my tongue, didn't need to be compared to anyone. The sound of my boots on the pavement was steady, almost calming, and I thought to myself that if I didn't show up to one of these dinners again, maybe no one would even care. Maybe that would be easier. But when I woke up the next morning, my phone was buzzing with messages, some polite, some nosy, and some that carried a sharp edge of accusation. "Are you okay?" one cousin texted. "Heard about what happened last night," another wrote. And then there was the voicemail from my aunt's friend, someone who wasn't even at the table, whispering in a conspiratorial tone about the scene at dinner, as though I had stood up, flipped the table, and screamed. The story had already grown legs overnight, stretched and twisted into something that didn't happen, and everyone seemed to know about the supposed breakdown in my house. The truth, of course, was that I had said nothing, absolutely nothing, not even a word in my defense. And yet somehow, by breakfast time, I had become the headline in a story I hadn't written, the villain in a play I hadn't agreed to perform in, the broken one who couldn't hold it together in front of her family. That's when it hit me like a cold wave. Silence hadn't protected me this time. It had been used against me, molded into proof that I was unstable, dramatic, bitter. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone buzzing in my hand, and felt something shift inside me, something I couldn't quite name yet but knew wasn't going away. For years, I had taken the role they gave me, the quiet one, the shadow, the afterthought, but in that moment, I realized that maybe silence didn't have to be my shield anymore. Maybe it could be my weapon. Because while they were all busy whispering about the breakdown at home, none of them noticed that I hadn't denied a single word of it. And that was the first time I wondered what would happen if, instead of correcting their version of the story, I let it grow. What if, just this once, I allowed the whispers to build into something even my mother couldn't control? What if the truth wasn't in fighting back, but in letting the cracks spread on their own? That thought sat with me all day, and I didn't answer the calls, didn't reply to the texts, didn't explain myself to anyone. Let them guess. Let them wonder. Because the real breakdown hadn't happened yet, and when it did, they wouldn't see it coming. By mid-morning, my phone sounded like an office desk trapped under a beehive, and while a more well-adjusted version of me might have thrown the whole thing into a drawer and gone for a run, I sat cross-legged on the rug with coffee going lukewarm and scrolled through messages that arrived with that careful tone people use when they want the latest without admitting they want the latest, cousins leading with "just checking in," and neighbors who have not spoken to me in months suddenly remembering. We once sold Girl Scout cookies together in a grocery store parking lot, all of them nudging, poking, itching for the shape of a story they could repeat later with a face of concern and a voice that implied wisdom. And as I watched their little typing bubbles appear and vanish, I realized I was not going to correct them, not today, because I could see so clearly how every rebuttal I offered would be fed back into the machine and ground down into a new version where I was dramatic, ungrateful, or worse. So instead I exhaled and let the rumors walk around the block while I decided which direction to tilt them. I started small, because small almost never sets off alarms, replying to one cousin with a steady line about leaving early because dinner had gotten a little heated, and I wanted to give Mom space, not naming the words that were said but reminding her, in a gentle way, that the person who poured the wine also poured the tone, and when my neighbor from the cul-de-sac asked if I was all right, I answered that I was fine, that I was more worried about Mom because the pressure of keeping up appearances is tough on anyone our age bracket looks to for stability, a phrase that carries a rosy halo in this town where the garden club has bylaws and men compare lawn edges like tournament scores. And I watched as her response softened immediately into the kind of sympathy that travels faster than anything I could post online. Then, because I was not entirely above using the oldest communications tower known to suburban America, I opened Facebook, which I barely touch except to acknowledge birthdays and the occasional graduation photo, and I wrote a short, careful message that sounded like I was speaking through a hug and a paper towel roll. Thanks to everyone who checked in. I left early last night because tension felt high, and I wanted to let things cool off. Please send some calm thoughts toward my mom today. She takes on a lot, and the holidays can amplify everything, which is the kind of sentence that says absolutely nothing and exactly what you need it to, and within minutes the comments filled with casseroles in the form of words. Acquaintances offering prayer lists and herbal tea brands, and a neighbor tagging the church wellness committee that blooms whenever someone's reputation nicks a thorn. I kept my day quiet, but not invisible, ran errands with deliberate slowness, returned a sweater at the mall because the fluorescent lights do not lie about necklines, and stopped by the pharmacy for a blood pressure cuff that I did not need but planned to leave in my mother's kitchen drawer with the manual peeking out just enough to be found, the kind of object that says something without a syllable, and, before you call me manipulative, remember that for years I have been told to speak up and then punished for the sound of my voice, so forgive me if today I let objects and tone do the heavy lifting while I save the loud stuff for when it counts. By late afternoon, the whispers had shifted an inch, which is all you ever need to tilt a family portrait, because now the story lived in a register where I remained quiet, respectable, a little sad, while my mother, our crowned matriarch with the perfectly organized spice rack and the charitable smile that bends reality, became the woman who might be overextending herself, who might have snapped, who might need rest and reflection and maybe less Sauvignon and more sleep. And if that sounds cruel, remember, I did not invent the story of the breakdown at home. I only handed it a sweater and asked it to wait on the porch. In the early evening, when the shadows along the fence started to look like men waiting for a train, I drove to my parents' house with a grocery bag that could pass for kindness at any angle. Chicken soup and a decent sourdough from the bakery that pretends it is Paris and sometimes succeeds, the new cuff. and a stack of glossy flyers from the community center advertising a stress management workshop written in such neutral language it could invite a stone, and I let myself in with the key. I have never returned because returning keys in families like mine becomes an act that requires witnesses, then moved through the rooms like a harmless breeze, tidying the stray wine glass on the counter, dropping the cuff into the second drawer, placing the flyers under the magnet shaped like a lighthouse, and scribbling a note in my neatest script. Stopped by, left soup, thinking of you. Please rest, which contains no accusation and every implication. I did not wait for her to come home because I did not trust my face to stay calm if hers arrived wearing that familiar smile, so I left, and on the way back I called Aunt Carol, the one person in our family who thinks gossip is a sport that should be played gently. And I told her in that measured voice you use with emergency operators that I was concerned about Mom, that last night seemed to take a lot out of her, that I wanted to make sure she had someone checking in besides me, and I heard Carol inhale and promise to handle it, which in her dialect means phone trees will blossom and subtle questions will be planted in half a dozen kitchens by nightfall. By the time I reached my apartment, my message inbox had rearranged itself into a different weather pattern, fewer interrogations and more. How is your mom? And tell Linda we adore her, but she needs to slow down. And while I chopped garlic for a pasta I ate standing up, because chairs felt like commitment, I laughed once, not because any of this was funny in the haha sense, but because sometimes the only way to keep yourself from dissolving is to find the comedy in the machinery, and in this machine, my mother had been the operator for so long that no one had noticed the belt could move the other way. Close to midnight, after I had washed the pan and left it to dry like a little silver moon, my phone lit up with my sister's name, and I let it ring until the voicemail caught her breath, because I wanted to hear the tone before the words. And when I pressed play she did not disappoint, her voice tight and bright, calling me manipulative, insisting I stop spreading narratives, reminding me that Mom had done absolutely nothing wrong, that I had manufactured drama, and that people at the club were asking questions I would not like, which is a sentence that means a committee has been formed, and I stood very still, the window open to a cold that made the whole scene sharper, and I realized that if my sister was leaving a message like that, then something had already slipped from their grip, which is a shame and also precisely the point. Before I slept, I drafted one final reply to the family group thread, wrote it carefully as if I were sewing a seam on a dress I had to wear in public, thanking everyone for their love, saying I was taking space, adding that I would not be attending Sunday dinner this week so that Mom could rest and the house could be peaceful, which in our particular dialect means the theater is closed for repairs, and I put the phone face down, stared at the ceiling, and told myself that restraint counts as action when it unsettles the right person, which it clearly had, because just after I switched off the lamp, a text from an unknown number slotted into the dark with a soft chime, no name, only a sentence that read, "You should know someone recorded last night." And then a link that waited like a trap I could not see but could already feel tightening. The link arrived like a mosquito at 2 in the morning, small, whining, and impossible to ignore, and though a better woman might have waited until daylight to click, I sat up in bed with my back against the headboard and watched myself not speaking while my mother delivered her little sermon about who mattered, the camera angle low and sly from somewhere near the sideboard, capturing the clink of glass against plate. The fast laugh my sister does when attention lands on her like stage lighting. And the exact moment when my face went still in that way I have perfected, a stillness I used to think looked weak, but in the glow of a stranger's phone screen looked like something closer to weathered oak. And if you have never seen your family behave on video the way they behave when they think no one's archiving it, let me tell you there is a special kind of honesty that leaks out when people forget the room has memory. I did not forward it to a soul for a full hour, not because I was noble, but because I understood the difference between pulling a fire alarm and letting smoke drift under the door until someone else asks whether we should leave. When I finally sent it, it went to Aunt Carol with a note that said I hoped she could help me convince whoever filmed it to take it down because Mom would hate the attention, and I swear I heard, between the lines of her reply, the sound of a church vestibule filling as a congregation comes in early to whisper. By mid-morning, I learned two truths at once. The first is that a video marked, "Please be discreet," multiplies faster than powdered sugar on a hot funnel cake. And the second is that my sister is a champion sprinter when it comes to damage control. Because she called before I finished my second cup of coffee with a voice tight enough to pluck, insisting that the clip was unfairly edited, that context was missing, that I should be a team player, and that mom had barely slept because of all this. Which landed like an accusation thrown in a silk wrapper. I told her I had asked Aunt Carol to tamp it down and left it there, because nothing scares a hall monitor like discovering the principal already has the memo. When she shifted tactics and reminded me she would be hosting a baby shower brunch for our cousin at the club that afternoon and hoped I would show up, appropriately supportive, I smiled into the phone and said I would bring muffins, which is the kind of promise that creates more questions than it answers. The club, which has always looked like a set designer's dream of modest sophistication, smelled of lemon polish and ambition, and the women floated in wearing floral prints and confidence, and as gifts piled up in a tasteful mountain of bows. I watched my sister bounce from group to group, all gleam and grace until Mrs. Connolly, who protects local reputations the way a lighthouse guards coastlines, asked with real curiosity whether my sister was the one who matters, and the resulting wince ran through my sister's smile like lightning through a summer sky. She laughed too brightly, called the line a silly joke, and then, in a flicker of poor judgment born of panic, scolded me with her eyes, which was a tactical error. Because every woman in that room understands what it means to get scolded with eyes you share a family with, and the air shifted a degree toward me without my raising a single finger. I had brought muffins, yes, stacked in a carrier, but I had also brought a thank you card addressed to the auto finance office that had mailed me by mistake a week earlier because apparently my address is still tangled with my parents'. A bland little envelope confirming the lease terms on a shiny compact SUV in my sister's name with my father as cosigner, and while there is nothing scandalous about a cosign, plenty of responsible people cosign. It tends to squeak when you have just finished a month of speeches about independent success, so I slid the envelope into my sister's open tote while complimenting her shoes, and a few minutes later, when she reached for lip balm and the letter rose like an uninvited truth, Mrs. Connolly saw the company letterhead before my sister shoved it down, which would have been a footnote on any other day except this day already carried a headline. I did not smirk, because smirking would have told the whole story too loudly. Instead, I asked if anyone wanted coffee and went to pour refills like a hotel manager, which is the role I have perfected, the kind that keeps you near every conversation without belonging to any of them. By the time cake appeared in neat white squares, the sheen around my sister had dulled half a shade, and when a guest, well-meaning and oblivious, asked how it felt to be the one who matters, my sister barked a laugh that could have chipped porcelain, then launched into a speech about responsibility and envy and people who cannot handle success, and though she never said my name, the room understood geography well enough to triangulate, and in that moment, with frosting soft under forks and chairs shifting in polite discomfort, I recognized that I did not need to shout to be heard. I only had to let the acoustics of her own performance carry. Later, as the plates were cleared and my sister clung to the podium of small talk like a sailor to a railing, I took one more step that looked like kindness, telling the event coordinator I would help tidy the back room, where I left, near the floral trash bin, a folded page from the community center's workshop list: time management, stress, boundaries, conflict de-escalation, circled neatly with a pen and tucked where any harried host would notice it and feel a pinch, which is not a crime and not even an accusation, just a mirror with soft lighting. When I got home, the video had traveled beyond the family, which I had expected, and into comment threads where strangers practiced the ancient sport of judging other people's mothers, which felt both satisfying and wrong. Like eating a second slice of cake alone in your car, I set the phone face down, washed my hands as if rumors left residue, and promised myself I would not check again until morning, a promise I kept for almost 7 minutes, because that is how long it took for a new message to arrive from a number I did recognize, my mother's, containing only a single sentence that was not a question and not a plea but something colder and better rehearsed. If you do not come tonight, your sisters, and I will tell the truth without you. Followed by a second text, a photo I had not seen in years, in which I am 20-something and angry at a backyard table, caught mid-argument, with a caption that read, "Do you remember what you said then?" and beneath it, a time and an address that were not my parents' house. The message sat on my phone like a stone dropped in water, creating ripples that refused to stop spreading, and although every fiber of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I had not seen the photograph or the threat hidden inside the words, I knew that silence this time would not protect me, because when my mother threatened to tell the truth, what she really meant was that she was prepared to rewrite history with the authority she had always carried in this family, and people would believe her simply because they always had. The address she sent was not our house, but the banquet room at St. Mary's Parish Hall, a place our family had rented for anniversaries and retirement parties. And the implication that a meeting had been staged there without my input told me that the gossip had swelled into something that could not be contained by phone calls and whispers anymore, that she intended to gather witnesses, to corner me, and to perform a new version of events that would paint me as the storm cloud in their perfect sky. When I arrived that evening, the hall smelled faintly of polish and leftover incense, and rows of folding chairs had been set up in that efficient way volunteers always manage, with a coffee urn steaming at the back and a stack of styrofoam cups waiting, as though this were an actual meeting and not a family ambush. My sister stood near the front in a cream blazer, looking tired around the eyes but still determined to hold her posture, while my father leaned against the wall, hands stuffed deep into his pockets, eyes sliding away from mine the moment they met, which told me everything about his role here: silent, compliant, unwilling to disrupt the choreography my mother had arranged. And then she appeared, my mother, standing near the podium that usually hosted bingo night announcements, with the photograph she had texted me placed carefully on the lectern, her hands folded in that way that suggested grace, but meant control. She began with a voice I had heard since childhood, calm and righteous, reminding everyone present, neighbors, aunts, cousins, even 2 members of her Bible study group, that family matters should be clarified before they become community scandals. And as she spoke, I realized she was not only fighting me but protecting herself from the erosion already visible in the sideways glances and careful coughs around the room. She described me as someone who had always struggled, who sometimes misremembered what was said, who had once, gesturing at the photograph, lashed out at her sister in front of everyone. The picture showed my face mid-argument, mouth open, brows drawn, but what the picture did not show was the context. My sister, 23 at the time, had been mocking me for losing a job I had loved, and I had finally raised my voice, only for my mother to catch it on camera and file it away like evidence. As I listened, I could feel the audience trying to decide which way the wind was blowing, and I knew if I simply sat there, the current would carry them where my mother wanted them to go. So I stood, not loudly, not in anger, but in a deliberate calm, and I walked to the front where I picked up the photograph, held it for everyone to see, and said that yes, this was me, angry, frustrated, human. But that photographs without stories are like receipts without items. They prove money changed hands, but not what was bought. I reminded them gently that the video circulating now, the one none of us had planned for, had shown another side of the truth, one in which my silence had been mistaken for collapse, one in which my mother's words had not been twisted but captured as they were spoken. And then I did something small that carried the weight of years. I reached into my bag and pulled out the finance letter for my sister's car, the one Mrs. Connolly had glimpsed, and I placed it on the podium beside the photograph. I did not read from it, I did not explain it, I only left it there in plain sight, a reminder that behind every polished story there are details that complicate the shine. The room shifted, the air prickled, and my mother's lips tightened, because she understood that once documents appeared, even benign ones, people began to wonder what else might exist in drawers, in files, in inboxes. My sister hissed my name under her breath, but the damage was done, not by anything explosive I had said, but by the suggestion that their version of the truth was not the only one. I excused myself then, thanked everyone for their concern, and walked out before anyone could call me back, because leaving on your own terms is sometimes louder than shouting. On the drive home, I replayed the faces in my mind: the aunt who looked at me with new calculation, the neighbor whose mouth twisted as though reconsidering loyalties, the cousin who suddenly seemed less eager to stand close to my sister. I knew this was not victory, not yet, but it was movement, and in a family like mine, movement is everything. That night, as I sat in my kitchen with the lights off and the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, I realized the collapse I had been waiting for was already underway, not in flames or screaming matches, but in the quiet unraveling of belief. The kind that spreads through whispers and sideways glances until the once solid structure tilts under its own weight. And as I placed the photograph on my table, smoothing the edges with my fingers, I understood that I had not destroyed my mother's authority. She had, by clutching so tightly to the image of control that she forgot how fragile the frame really was. What I did not know yet was how far the cracks would run, and whether I was prepared for what would happen when the walls finally came down. The day after the parish hall, the house felt like a theater with the curtain already half raised, because before I even put my hand on the doorknob I could hear the quiet fury that passes for conversation in families like mine, the clipped whispers and the long, careful pauses where someone decides whether to be honest or to be strategic. And when I stepped into the kitchen, I found my mother at the table with her hands poised over a legal pad as if minutes were about to be taken, my sister leaning against the counter in a blazer that looked more defensive than stylish, and my father occupying his usual Switzerland near the window, polite, neutral, and completely absent from the work of truth. My mother started in a voice so calm it should have been taxed, saying the town was confused, that people were interpreting without context, that I had encouraged misreadings, and that it would be best for everyone if I apologized for the misunderstanding, which was a breathtaking sentence even by her standards, because it contained the accusation, the verdict, and the pardon all in one breath, and I realized while looking at her perfectly folded list of talking points that she truly believed she could steer a flood with stationery. I sat opposite her, placed my keys in the middle of the table where they made a small but satisfying sound, and told her in the slow, steady cadence I reserve for insurance agents that I would not be attending Sunday dinners for a while, that I would not carry the logistics of birthdays or showers or holiday prep anymore, that I had contacted the restaurant that still had a standing reservation under my name for the next 3 months and canceled it, and that I had already emailed the church volunteer coordinator to remove me from the sign-up sheet with the very polite note that I needed rest, which in this family is another way of saying I was closing my unpaid position as stage manager of their social life. And the flutter that passed over her face at the word "canceled" told me I had finally reached the lever that mattered. My sister, who had been fidgeting with a blue pen like it might write her out of the room, scoffed that this was petty and theatrical, that none of it touched the central issue, so I slid a manila envelope across the table and asked her to open it, and when she did, she found a pre-approval notice from her bank confirming the refinance of her car lease without our father as cosigner, along with a bland little calendar from the finance office and a note in my neat handwriting that said, "You keep telling everyone you did this alone. Now you actually do," which was not a dagger, but it was sharp enough to slice a ribbon. And she flushed the color of a soft brick because even she understood the difference between being celebrated for independence and becoming responsible for it. My mother tried to pivot back to the breakdown at home, that rumor she had thought would drown me, and had instead left her coughing, insisting we must present a united front and control what is being shared, but the room had shifted, the air thick with the fact that I had turned off the faucet she drinks from, so I reached for the last item in my bag, a small box that used to hold cufflinks and now held the only thing I was prepared to return, the key to their house with its little brass tag engraved with our surname, and I placed it next to my father's coffee like a tiny bell that had just told an ending, telling them that I loved them, but I would not be the quiet target anymore. That loving people who do not love you correctly is a kind of slow injury, and that I was officially on medical leave from being the family disappointment. I did not mention the group message I had scheduled for that evening to the extended family and 2 of my mother's prized committee friends, Message that contained exactly 3 items and not a syllable more. The unedited dinner clip, the screenshot of the sentence, "She's the one who matters," sent from my mother to my sister months earlier with a string of celebratory exclamation points. And the voicemail my sister had left me calling me manipulative while asking me to be a team player, because I preferred to let those receipts arrive like a polite knock after I had left the porch. My sister lunged toward blame, accusing me of sabotage, of jealousy, of manufacturing martyrdom, and then, as if the script required an intermission, something flickered in her face that was not anger but panic. Because even she could see that the room had stopped obeying the old gravity, that my mother's authority had sprung a leak, and that the person who usually patched it with a smile and a spreadsheet, me, was standing up without reaching for a towel. My father finally spoke, a soft attempt at truce that sounded like compromise but meant inertia, and I looked at him long enough for him to look away, because some silences are not shields or weapons, but mirrors that show you everyone's true size. I stood, took my coat, and told my mother I hoped she would rest, that the community center offered an excellent workshop on letting go that I had circled on a flyer in her drawer, that I wouldn't oppose any story she shared so long as she stopped using my name as the cautionary tale, and that if anyone asked whether a breakdown had happened at home, I would say the foundation had been cracking for years, and the inspector only just arrived. I left to the sound of my mother calling my name the way you call a dog that knows the gate is finally open, and when I reached my car I did what I had promised myself I would not do and checked my phone, where the scheduled message had dispatched itself right on time, and the first ripples were already visible, not rage or applause, just a communal recalibration that would keep many kitchens busy. And I sat there in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel and admitted that victory does not feel like fireworks when you win by subtraction. It feels like a room gone suddenly quiet after years of loud music, which is its own kind of dizzy. Later that night, I lay on my couch under the cheap blanket that is kinder than any heirloom and thought about the word revenge, how people hear drama in it when sometimes it is only a change in bookkeeping, a new ledger where debts and favors finally sit in their true columns, and I wondered if walking away counted as payback or as a confession, if I had pulled the trigger or just refused to catch the match my mother had been waving for decades, and as the phone kept vibrating on the table with messages I did not open, I decided that the answer would depend on who retells this story at the next dinner, which I will not attend, and whether they finally admit that silence is not an empty space, but a room where someone else is no longer welcome to speak for me.